Hello everyone and welcome back to the studio for a bit of a different video today. So no, today we are not going to be crafting or anything. I'm actually going to be talking about the fair because it did happen, it is over now. And I want to share a bit about how things went, my experience through all of it, how things were set up, and maybe even some lessons or things to take forward as we move on to future fairs. So for some context, you've been seeing these first few episodes of From the Studio have really been focused just on this fair. And what this fair was a kind of neighborhood gathering just to get everyone together now that the pandemic has stabilized and we are allowed to have larger gatherings. They had a market stall area, there was a silent auction going on, there was even vintage cars on display. Very interesting. So when I was made aware that market stalls were an option for this event, and this was kind of at the start of August, I was not ready to actually be doing anything. I thought market stalls was going to be something way into the future, like after we launch and stuff. But the more I thought about it, I actually felt like it was a good opportunity to kind of give everyone a sneak peek of what I have in store. And in a sense, it was a good opportunity to kind of dive right into the whole seeing how people perceive your product, the sense that I had. This was also at a point where I wasn't sure what sense I wanted to have. So this kind of market fair was the perfect opportunity to get a bit of consumer feedback, if you will, and see what people thought. And it was kind of timely because overall, Mornington House was actually inspired by the neighborhood and how all these little intangibles made life feel very different and inspired me a lot. So it was kind of the perfect place to introduce ourselves to the world, if that made any sense. I think an important thing when it comes to anything with business is to know your intentions going into it. So I know for a lot of people, and there's nothing wrong with this, I should clarify, a lot of people go into market stalls with the intention for either more sales or for kind of networking and stuff. And in my case, it wasn't really going to be a money-making thing for me. Yes, obviously sales would be nice, but I really wanted this to be a couple of things. First of all, an opportunity to see how it's like to set up a market stall, to manage the whole how you present your products, how to interact with customers, seeing how they respond to things. And also it's just that little opportunity for me to say that I've done something for myself. When you're new to all of these things and you've never done something like running a market stall before, it can be very intimidating and you kind of get fearful of it. It's like, oh no, are people just gonna say my stuff is horrible? Are they gonna kind of validate my fears during the testing phase of, oh, some candles don't really have a smell, and they're gonna tell me right in the face that there's no smell and it smells horrible. All of those things. So yeah, you saw all of this setup in terms of the preparation of the products and stuff. I was not ready for full launch, to be honest. So I kind of turned that into an opportunity in itself to treat it as a sneak preview for the neighborhood. So we had the sampler candles where everyone could kind of help me shortlist the scents. That's what you saw in a previous episode of From the Studio. We also had previews of the jars over here that they can see kind of what we're working on, and they at least have a sense of what we will be making available once the brand has launched. And I also was offering samples of soap. So we haven't really talked much about soap so far in the series, but it is something else that I work on the side. When it came to the approach of this market stall, because it was a new brand and people have not kind of seen everything before, I kind of really wanted to focus on telling the story, my story, the brand story, and so that they understand a little bit about why certain things are the way they are, in terms of the colors, the designs, what inspired me. And so that's what I emphasized with the things that I prepared for signage and stuff. So I actually prepared a little booklet thing that went through kind of a bit of the story in a simple term. And obviously I was there to explain the story to people who stopped by as well. But this was kind of some people prefer kind of having something that they could read on their own time, or if say I was busy, they could kind of read this on their own time. Oh gosh, it's my face. So yeah, this little booklet has a brief overview of kind of the story, who I am and what we offer. And I think this is something that I'm glad I did. Not many people actually kind of read it, and I think it might have been how I positioned it. I had a small table, there was not much I could work with. But yeah, and I actually found that going through the motion of sharing the story over and over again was really good practice for knowing what or how to explain the story. So I found that at the start of the fair, like when people stopped by, we went very much like a practical approach of like, hi, welcome, do you want to smell, do you want to try out some scents? Do you want to help us decide on scents? And then as the evening went on, I started know how to kind of introduce my story in terms of like, weaving in things like, these are our brand's actually inspired by the neighborhood, and the colors of the jars are actually inspired by certain elements of the neighborhood. It's stuff like that that I think was very good to have done, because now I feel more comfortable about how to actually share the story in a more concise way. And it's actually kind of interesting because they had speakers or MCs during the event, and they went up to every single store owner to kind of learn about what they're selling and stuff. And I was actually one of the last ones that they interviewed. And by the end of it, I had repeated my stories so many times to everyone who stopped by my stall that I felt a lot more comfortable explaining my story. And there might actually even be a snippet here that shows me. Okay, so I'm over here at Mornington House. We are a handcrafted home goods store, actually inspired by living here. So I kind of use that as inspiration for the candles and the soaps that we have created. All of these are handcrafted. It's been something I've been working on over the pandemic and stuff. Yeah, so a nice takeaway in terms of getting practice on the storytelling of the brand. Next, I want to talk a bit about the setup, because again, this was a very kind of scrappy setup that we worked with. I had this table from home. It was just a random table that someone gave to us because they were moving out. We've had it for years. It's been in many different parts of the house. For that weekend, it became my market stall table. So for this event, we had to bring our own tables and chairs. And everyone else was bringing portable tables that they could kind of fold and things like that. My setup was not as glamorous, let's put it that way. I had to actually unscrew the table legs off the tabletop and then kind of reassemble it at the stall area. I will say though, it worked. And I was lucky because we had this random like green throw and a shelf. So when you added it together, it still was something that was presentable. So I did invest in a couple of mini easels that I printed my price list and my signage on. And then I also prepared a QR code for a payment method, which is what we use in Singapore. It's Pay Now. And a pre-order form. This was something I prepared kind of the day beforehand in case anyone from the event was interested in the products after sampling it. They could actually place an order because my website was not ready at the point. So like I didn't have a proper order system. And I think moving forward, this is something I need to be more mindful of, is I need to prepare these things much earlier, because I don't think the Google form was very approachable. Even when I was setting it up, there were things and features that I thought Google had that they didn't, and it got very cumbersome. And my printer is based in my office, which is like an hour away from my house. So by the time I realized that the form was not able to be set up the way I wanted to, I could not reprint the QR code. So it's stuff like that in hindsight, I should have prepared it earlier, but I didn't think to prepare a form like that until the day itself. So whoopsies. And yeah, one more thing I did was kept a speaker underneath my shelf area just to provide a bit of ambient music. Not too overpowering or not too loud, but just something that adds to the overall sensory experience of going up to the stall. Okay, so then we move on to when everyone started coming over to the stalls. I thought I was gonna be a lot more nervous and awkward about people coming up to me and like talking about my products, but I think when you have that subject that you can immediately jump to when people come forward, it's a lot less awkward than a cold kind of socializing situation where you don't really know what to say other than, oh, hi, how's the weather? Oh, it's hot today. So I kind of leveraged on that as a conversation starter. So it was a lot about like, oh, hey, how are you doing? Good afternoon. Do you want to try these scents first? We're trying to shortlist some scents. And because it is a free thing, it's a free activity, and people in general are like curious about candle scents, I guess. A lot of people were just like, oh yeah, sure. And they came up. And one of the things I kept emphasizing when it came to them trying the scents was actually that they could give whatever feedback they wanted. It could have been positive, it could have been negative. Obviously, the angle of how you say this shouldn't come across as very pushy. Like, don't keep saying, like, tell me if it's bad, tell me if it's bad, like every 5 seconds. But I made sure I mentioned it at least once to each person when they started smelling it because I wanted genuine feedback. Sometimes people can be very nice about feedback and they're like, oh, everything's nice. But as the person who needs to make a decision on the scents, it doesn't really help the narrowing down of what you have available. So I'm really glad that actually a lot of people gave very fair feedback. So most people just went through all the 8 scents and they kind of smelt things. There were different responses to different scents, obviously, because it's subjective. And they kind of told me by the end of it, like which ones they preferred and why. That was the best thing I felt about the feedback was they gave me the reasons why they liked something as opposed to just saying that something is nice. So a lot of people were like, a few of the scents were the more safe scents in terms of it's a more universal scent. More people are gonna generally like the scent. And then there are a few scents that people were like, I'm not sure about it, but it was never an outright, it's a bad scent. They were like, it's not for me, but it may be for someone else. And again, these nuances, the constructive feedback was very helpful. And it's funny because you can see the difference between the scents that people like versus the scents they ended up walking away with in terms of making a purchase of the sample. So the one scent that had pretty much a universal response was Barista Brew. So this is a kind of coffee-based scent, right? And every single person who smelled that candle took it up, they smelled it, and they're like, whoa. It was the same reaction for every single person. So that was kind of funny. And it's at least good to see that that scent makes an impact on first impression. But interestingly, that was not the scent that sold out. We did sell a few, but it was not the main sellers. The main sellers were actually what was deemed the safe scents. So this is interesting in terms of kind of trying to develop your scent catalog. There are going to be scents that are impactful on first impression, but maybe not the best sellers. There will be scents that are kind of the safe scents, but are going to drive sales. There's a lot of different nuances to it that was very interesting to observe. Another thing in terms of behavior that I found from the setup was seeing where people were drawn to. So I did find that because we were so focused on the samples and the scents, people automatically diverted there, like they traveled there straight away. So I did find that by the end of it, no one actually took a look at the jars that we had prepared. So I think this was fine for this event because ultimately it was kind of a we need your feedback kind of event. But I think moving forward once we launch, I need to figure out how to set up the table in a way that better emphasizes how the jars are related to the candles. I don't think most people made that connection that the jars were actually what the candles were going to come in if they ordered a full size. So that's something I really need to figure out how to better communicate. I did put little signs at the base, but I don't think people read them. And I think it's something about the line of sight. Again, when it comes to setting up, that's something that only experience can kind of tell you. And you, like, moving forward, you then have to adjust accordingly. So I might not put the signs that low down the next time. I might have to put them higher up or even put specific signs that are similar to the easel. And one more thing that I did notice about the jars is that people were in general surprised when I then brought up that it was handcrafted. So I'm not sure if I should take anything away from that response or that I am not communicating well enough that my products are handcrafted. I did for most of the customers upfront say that all of my stuff are handcrafted, but for some reason it didn't register for a lot of people. So I'm gonna have to see whether or not it's something I tweak in terms of communicating the stuff. In terms of what I prepared visually, there really wasn't much that emphasized the handcraft, I guess. So maybe that's something to consider for the next market stall. And when it came to the scents, I think one very good thing that I kind of took away from seeing how people responded to the scents was to try my best not to preemptively give them an opinion about the scents. It's very tempting because you, as the person who has created like the candle, know how you feel about the scents, but you kind of don't want to impose that on others because then the feedback becomes a bit skewed. I did have one or two situations where I kind of preemptively said that, the Fallen Rain scent is a bit polarizing. But as the customers stopped by and I tried and tried again in terms of communicating, I started to do that less and less. And I only told them that after the fact. And I think that got me more accurate feedback in terms of their genuine reactions to scents that they've never smelled. And it's actually kind of fun to see how people react to scents for the first time, especially because you've already formed such a solid opinion about a scent by the time you're done testing for so many months that it's refreshing to see again how other people think about it. One more thing that was a good observation was actually this interaction I had with someone who was giving feedback about the jars that I created. So this one's an interesting one, and I haven't kind of formed my opinion about whether I did something wrong or whether it was fine. But basically, this person came up to me, and after going through the scents and like everything that I had on display, they were like, they wanted to give some constructive feedback. So they were mentioning how they would have preferred that the candles are refillable. In fact, they asked the question of, will your candles be refillable? And it has been something that I've been through in the past. In fact, when I wanted to launch Mornington House initially, I was working with refillable candles. There's an episode at the start, I think, that mentions this. So I kind of explained the situation of how, like, ideally I want to do that as well, because I agree, I find single-use candles a bit wasteful, and how I tried it, but because of the material situation, I don't have a solution for it yet, but I'm working on it. And then the next thing they suggested was, if you could have a lid for the jar, that would be nice. And again, this was something that I have been thinking about. It's just that with handcrafted goods and with the silicone mold situation that I was working on, the shape has not been consistent enough that I felt comfortable giving a lid that would fit perfectly with every jar. So I explained that as well. Where I am a bit unsure of in terms of how I responded to that conversation was, I'm not sure if I came across as a bit... I don't know how to phrase this right, but you know how it feels like when a teacher comes up to you and asks for feedback, and you give feedback with good intentions, right? And then sometimes their response makes you feel like your feedback didn't matter, or like, yeah, your feedback was useless. I'm not sure if I made that customer feel that way because of how I explained the situation. I don't know, and feel free to let me know your perspective on this, because I feel like there are different ways of looking at this. One, you could ultimately say that you were communicating like transparently with the consumer of you appreciate the feedback and this is the situation with testing and how you are working on it, or that it comes across as very much like I said, like, oh, thank you for the feedback, but I actually didn't need any of that. That was not my intention when I was explaining my situation. And I think moving forward, if that conversation comes up again, which it definitely will, I think I need to emphasize a bit more about the like, thank you for the feedback. And I don't know, maybe at some point I might try just leaving it at that. Like, maybe they don't need to know that I'm aware of it. So yeah, I'm curious to know what everyone thinks about, like, if you had that situation, how would you feel about it and how would you respond? So we moved on now to people who actually made purchases. So I was actually pleasantly surprised, to be honest, and I feel like for most first-time stall owners, you have that like same tinge of, oh, people are actually buying from me. What fun. So yeah, we actually got a decent number of sales. Like, I sold out of 1 cent, we almost ran out of another cent. So that was a pleasant surprise. I think samplers were a good decision because, again, when it came to things like candles, there are so many nuances that looking at a product online or in person is not enough for you to decide whether or not it's going to be a good product for you, right? Because what may smell nice in person may not smell the same once you burn it. If you're buying online, you can't even smell it. So I think samplers moving forward are things I'm going to continue to offer, because I would much rather have a consumer who buys a smaller sample candle first, spends less, but feels much more comfortable about their entire purchasing decision and knowing that they know that they are not spending more money than they need to to test something. Because if they were to buy a full-size candle and they weren't happy with it, it would be like 3/4 of their money wasted, right? I think I'd much rather have them know that they want to purchase something from me and then be a happy customer, as opposed to get them right out of the bed, make them spend money, and then they come back like dissatisfied. And just overall, I feel like I want to approach the customer situation from very much I want them to have as pleasant of an experience as possible with my products. Like, I'm not about forcing a sale on them or trying to make money off of them just because, right? So whenever anyone made a purchase, these were actually what I would deem the thank you cards, if you will. So on one side is actually a thank you note. It kind of emphasizes that this happened during the neighborhood event, when we will be launching, which would be in October. If you have any comments, please reach out to me on Instagram and email. And then this little green area was the last minute thing I added, which was, we're close to the holidays and you made a purchase. If you like the thing you purchased and you would like to order something for the holidays, there's a QR code for you to place an order. And what I did was I had a special price for the neighborhood event. So anyone who ordered through this, or pre-ordered, I should say, will have that price locked in for the holiday. Because when I launch, it will be like a slightly different price. On the other side, I actually had product-specific care instructions that I ran through specifically with each customer. So after they made their purchase, I actually went up to them and personally went through each point, which was like, how best to care for your candle. Be aware that this candle is not meant for scenting an entire room. Because again, look how tiny the sample candle is. This will not scent a large room. So just making everyone aware up front about what this product is intended for, so that they don't buy it thinking that, oh, I'm going to be able to scent my entire living room with a tiny candle, and then they end up disappointed. I know in this case, it's kind of common sense for most people that this candle will not do it, but you don't want to assume, and I much rather actually make them fully aware of it when they are purchasing, instead of them having to come back and you suddenly realize, oh, they were not aware of it. I also went through safety things like trimming of the wick, how long they should be burning their candle for. Because I think if you're not a candle user, you don't actually know that you're supposed to ideally be burning it for a specific length of time to ensure that it's burning evenly, yada, yada, yada. Safety instructions as well in terms of not extinguishing with water. I think some people, again, if they're not aware, they might consider doing that. And then how long the candle will last them in terms of the entire life of the candle. So with the sample candles, I told them like if they're burning with the proper duration, it will last them about 2 cycles. And then I kind of added on an extra point of it's just enough for you to gauge whether or not you like the scent and whether you would like to get a full-size candle. So it's kind of just giving them what the purpose of the product is, and moving forward, if they actually like the candle, what options there are for them. And it's nothing imposing. It's not like, oh, after you try the sample, buy the candle. It's like the options there if you like the candle. So there's a nuance there. Same thing for soap, in terms of the shelf life, how they best store it, yada, yada, yada. One thing I did find about these thank you notes is that people actually didn't want to take them. So I prepared, like, you can see, a stack of them, right? But most of them were like, oh no, it's okay, we'll save paper, like, just run through it with me and then you can have it back. I guess I was not expecting that, although it's a good thing in terms of kind of paper and stuff not being kind of single use, right? Even though it can be recyclable. So maybe one thing I might try the next round is having a QR code link that will bring them to a page that runs through all of this for them. Obviously, once I set up my website, that would be a lot easier, but at that point, I was not ready, and I think it's a good observation in terms of how people responded to that. Okay, and one last thing, and this is a bit more of a practical business related thing, and I think this is the area that needs to improve the most, quite honestly, is the whole tracking of purchasers and customers. So, I don't have my notebook with me today, but I was not prepared. And I'm not someone who naturally knows how to kind of keep track of things like this. But what I did was I got an empty notebook and a pen, and we scribbled down every time someone made a purchase of like, oh, okay, they got one of the grapefruit and one of the heirlooms. And By the time we got to like the third customer, the scribbles were just all over the page. We did not know which customer purchased which product anymore. Like we knew that we sold four candles, but we didn't know who, like, or which customer ordered which combination of the candles. This is something I really need to work on. Also, in terms of the tracking and the finances, we had like spare change. And even though there was the cashless option available, most people did choose to pay in cash, right? But I forgot to do a thing, or I didn't think to do a thing, I should say, of checking how much cash was in the pouch to start with versus at the end of the event. Because that's kind of a safety mechanism of if your tracking goes wrong, at least you know the difference between how much you started with versus how much you ended with, right? So yeah, it's stuff like that I really, really need to plan out better next time. And thankfully, like my parents, they kind of knew to do that, so they did actually count beforehand. So that was helpful. Yeah, but I think that about sums up the entire fair experience. I will say, for a first run, this was very much ideal for giving me that confidence boost to be like, okay, yes, you can do this. Like, people actually like your products. There were quite a few compliments about the design of stuff, and I'm very humbled and grateful grateful for that. And I'm glad that I got to do this like so early on in my creative business journey, I will say. I thought I was only going to start things like this after I launched and after I knew what products I had available, but I think it was good that we started this before the actual launch. I hope you enjoyed this little rundown of how the fair went. This is the first phase of our journey over. Now we move on to the big one, which is actually launching the brand. And there's so much to do. Like, I need to reorganize this space. I've been working with the clutter, but I really think once we start moving, we need to have an organized space. I need to prepare product photography, my website, the actual products, now that we have a rough sense of what people are interested in. That's going to be coming up in the next few episodes. But for today, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you soon.